Welcome to Journey to Safety, a podcast by United Response. I'm Claire, and today we are diving into a critical issue that affects countless individuals: hate crimes on transport. Our goal is to shed light on this troubling phenomenon and explore how we can all contribute to making public transport safer for everyone. Today, we are honoured to have a very special guest with us, David Wilkin, who has dedicated much of his career to studying and addressing disability hate crime on transport. David is the author of a highly regarded book, Disability Hate Crime: Experiences of Everyday Hostility on Public Transport, which delves deep into the experiences of individuals with disabilities. His extensive research and advocacy work has made significant strides in bringing this issue to the forefront of public consciousness. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you start by sharing with us, our listeners, what experienced you and inspired you to write this book and focus your work on this issue?
Well, I think firstly, because I'm autistic, and years ago I was a victim of this kind of hostility, but in those days it wasn't called hate crime. Hate crime didn't exist, and in fact, it still doesn't as a piece of legislation. But hate crime didn't exist. It was just accepted that people with various disabilities would be seen as weak, would be picked on, and would be victims of somebody else's prejudice. And it really didn't matter too much. And that kind of made me angry because that being a victim of this kind of hostility changed my life forever. It made several things go wrong in my life, and it was the forerunner to some pressures that I really didn't need. And I wondered what kind of start that other people had who didn't have disabilities. So in later life, when I had the time, I thought I'd focus on this and try and establish how many researchers had actually ventured into the field of looking at hostility against disabled people. And the answer pretty much was none. That's probably not fair. Across the face of the world, there were two or three. And I think now we're up to the magical number of about 8. But those are people who have published works and have looked into this in depth and made it a professional field of interest. And public transport, specifically, is like a microcosm of society. All life is there. When you're in the train or the bus, all life is there. People from all different walks of life, people in different moods, frustrations, people with different approaches to life gather in that small space, which can often be a kind of melting pot for people's feelings, for how people conduct themselves, to bring out people's prejudices. And public transport is also can be a frustrating place. It's fine when it works well, but when it's crowded, when it's hot, when it's running late, when it's stuck somewhere, all of those frustrations are magnified. So not only is it a microcosm of society where people gather in a small space, but it can also be this kind of pressure cooker of anger and emotion and feeling when anything can happen.
So, in your book, you discuss several misconceptions about disability hate crime. And could you share some of those, the most important ones, on how they impacted the way these crimes are perceived and handled?
Yeah, a lot of people don't actually think that anything such as disability hate crime exists. But in terms of treating people with equality and respect, it does. And the equality and support organisations in the UK all know full well that hostility against disabled people does exist. And in legal terms, there is a piece of legislation that says if somebody does attack somebody because of their disability, they can attract a higher prison sentence, for example, or a tougher sentence in court. But there is no actual piece of legislation that says this is a disability hate crime. So disability hate crime are acts of hostility against disabled people, whether that disability is hidden or not, and their associates. And these can take many different guises. So it could be a face-to-face insult, it could be abuse, it could be people pointing out your disability, what a burden you are on society, how awkward it is. And it could get a lot worse than that. I've had cases where people have been told they shouldn't have been born, where mothers have been told their children are a burden on society and should be destroyed, where people have been, because they may have unfortunate smells or mannerisms, have been told that they should remove themselves from that place, should get on a different bus, should be taught in special schools, should be removed from society, all because they were lucky enough to be born with a disability or get it later in life. And as for the misconceptions, the abuse can be anything from the hate crime can be anything from abuse, name calling, blocking somebody's passageway, throwing somebody off of a bus, throwing somebody off of a train, kidnapping somebody, carrying out sexual assaults. I have seen the whole range. And having worked with hundreds of people in this field now, I can pretty much offer a complete range of abuse, assault, and serious assaults that happen against the person.
So, with these hostilities, from your extensive research, what are some early warning signs that a hate crime or hostility might be occurring on public transport? And how can individuals and authorities be more vigilant?
The early signs are when we've all seen it probably on buses and trains, is when somebody loses their calm and attacks or abuses somebody. And the difference this time is that abuse is tailored to the fact that the victim has a disability or uses extra equipment or has a child with them and they can't move, stuff like that. So instead of saying you are a whatever and using the insult, it's you are a disabled whatever, and using that disability as a justification for carrying out the abuse. So what can people do, and what can transport companies do? People, firstly, don't join in. It's easy to join in. It's easy to target your abuse and your frustration on some poor devil that just happens to be there and disabled. Don't join in. Yeah, you don't have to make it worse for people. That isn't your duty in life. Second thing people can do is try and dissuade, and I know this is difficult, but try and dissuade the person who's doing the abuse from doing it. Try and say, look, mate, what is the matter with you? Just leave him alone, yeah? I know that's difficult to do. I know you need a certain amount of courage to do that. But the easiest thing is not to join in with the abuse in the first place. And you can certainly, as an onlooker, as a witness, you can report it to the police. They do take these crimes seriously in most areas. So just call the police on 101, report it online, make a note of the vehicle number you're in, like the carriage number or the bus fleet number, which is inside the vehicle, and that will help the police. What can transport companies do? Educate people. Put up posters asking us to respect each other, to watch out for each other, just to be a little bit cautious and respectful, especially in times of frustration. And for staff, you can give them just the basis of training, just the basic outline that people with disabilities also have rights. So even the most basic training can tell staff not to be abusive, because that is actually a criminal offence, to keep an eye out for disabled people. And bus company and train companies themselves can educate their passengers simply by using posters or other campaigns which have been successful in the past.
Thanks, David. You've also spoken about the underreporting of these incidents. Why do you think that so many hate crimes on public transport go unreported? What steps can we do to change that?
Some people just want to escape the problem that's happening to them at the moment. They don't want to sit there and be the target of somebody else's abuse. So when that bus has stopped, when they've got off, or when the abusers got off, They just want to go home and hide. So they just want to get away from the scene and forget the whole thing. So the last thing they don't want to do is to report it, because to do that would be to bring the whole situation back into their minds. And they don't want that. They can't blame people for that. But by doing so, the police and other authorities will not know that it ever happened. And that's the problem. If we don't know that it's happening, then money won't be channeled into curing the problem, and time won't be channeled into training the police and other agencies. So what can we do about this? Reporting is a lot easier than people think. You can call the police on 101, but you may have to wait on the line. There are extensive waiting times these days. You can report it online, which is often quicker, providing you have the capability of doing so. You can report it via Crime Stoppers, which is an anonymous agency. You can report it through third-party reporting organisations, people like Victim Support, people like Stop Hate. These all take third-party reports from victims and forward them on to the police, either anonymously or with the name of the victim. But just remember, if you make a report anonymously, it will never appear in court, because you can't have an anonymous victim in court. Somebody has to have a name. Unless these are reported, we will never have a picture of how often this is happening and the impact on the everyday victims of these crimes.
So you've worked on several initiatives aimed at reducing hate crimes on public transport. Could you share some of your successful strategies, please, or programs that have really made a difference?
The trouble with most transport organisations, they don't understand what hate crime is, let alone disability hate crime. And they don't want to understand it either, because it might take money and time. And, they don't want to spend any of that. But once the cure is found, the cure is quite cheap and easily successful. Some bus companies have integrated closer liaison programs with local police forces and local authorities, whereby they have multi participant panels that meet occasionally, and then on those occasions they can discuss hate crime that happens within their sector. In other areas, a couple of places have put together hate crime charters, which themselves are not very interesting documents. You can easily fall asleep reading one. But the fact is that parts of the charter is built into the policies of the company. So the charter, for example, might point out that staff should be on the lookout for episodes of hostility and hatred against disabled people. And if that's in the charter, then that can be built into staff training manuals, into staff training opportunities. It could then be built into liaison meetings with local police. It can be built into several of the protocols that the public transport operator uses. But in order for it to be built into those protocols, it has to first exist.
So finally, David, after all your years of so much research and support, what message would you like to send to public transport authorities and fellow passengers about the importance of creating a safe and inclusive environment for everyone?
Just listen. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody else who has a disability. Okay? The one thing is, and I'd like you to bear in mind, first of all, is they didn't ask to be disabled. And you making their lives worse isn't going to make it any better for them. And the second thing that doesn't seem to strike people very often is we could all become disabled at any minute. Because of something that happens to us, we may be struck down with a disability. So you may be the next victim. So have a little thought for others and a little respect for others who are using your service with you. And bear in mind that their journey is probably much tougher than yours. So bear in mind that these people not only have a range of difficulties before you've met them, but those difficulties are exacerbated by the hatred and hostility that they face in everyday situations. And those situations deeply impact on people physically and psychologically. They keep them at home. so that they don't get out for medical appointments, don't get out for education, and they don't get out to work or for interviews for work, which means that they can't get that work, which means that you have to support them even more. So even if you have to be selfish about this, just have a little think.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and all of your hard work that you have done on this subject. Stories like the ones that you've documented are exactly why we've launched our survey on disability hate crime on public transport. We want to gather as many personal experiences as possible to help push for changes that are so desperately needed. If you've experienced a disability hate crime on public transport, we encourage you to participate in our survey. It's simple. The link will be shared alongside this podcast. Please come share your experience. Every response helps us build a case for the changes that are so desperately needed.